Welcome to Deloitte's Debriefs Geography Updates webcast series in Asia Pacific. Our webcast today is from our Geography Update series and is titled Potential Issues in Online Gaming Industry Considering the Recent Changes in Law. My name is Madhava Yatigiri and I'm an indirect tax partner based in Deloitte, India. I'm delighted to be the host for today's webcast. I have four speakers along with me today: Shilpi Chaturvedi, DP Nagendra Kumar Sir, Neha Agarwal, and Hiren Shah. Shilpi is a tax partner in the IDT practice. DP Nagendra Kumar Sir is a senior advisor in the indirect tax practice. Neha is a tax partner in the M&A practice. Hiren is an executive director in the GBT practice. All our speakers
So while Madhav will speak, just to continue, all our speakers today are based in Deloitte, India. You may access our bios on the left side of the screen. Before I introduce agenda for today's webcast, I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of features of our webcast console. First, all users are on listen only mode. If you have any content related questions, you can submit the same at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of the right of the screen. We'll do our best to respond to your questions during the presentation. Second, all PC users can maximize or minimize each box at your convenience during the webcast. You may also explore the icons at the bottom of the screen if you want to download today's slides and related publications. Please go to the Downloads and Links box. On the other hand, mobile device users can view the slides and answer the survey on the screen. Thirdly, if you require an attendance record for this event, you will receive an automated email with CP certificate after watching for 50 minutes. Now, let me give you an overview of the topics that we are going to discuss today. First, we will walk you through the background of the legislative history of taxation of online gaming in India. After that, we will discuss the tax implications from Indian goods and service tax standpoint, followed by regulatory changes and income tax standpoint. This will be followed by question and answers at the end of the session. We hope that you find the session interesting. I will now hand over to Shilpi to take this forward.
Thanks, Elaine. Hello, everyone. I'm Shilpi Chaturvedi, and thanks for joining this session today. Today, I'll be taking you through the proposed indirect tax amendments in relation to the online gaming industry. In India, the issue of applicability of GST on online gaming sector has been a matter of significant debate. Let's have a look at the journey. Historically, Indian laws have always differentiated online games into game of skills and game of chance. The term game of skill and game of chance has not been specifically defined under the legislation. However, there are numerous court judgments where the key aspects of distinction between the two have been analyzed. Game of chance involves betting and gambling, which is taxable at 28% on the gross gaming revenue. Further, several courts have held that in a game of skill, the result depends on the knowledge, training, and experience and ability of the player, and this does not amount to gambling or betting. Thus, game of skill is protected as a legitimate business activity under the Constitution of India. Game of skills are considered as actionable claims and are not held liable to GST. However, the platform fee charged by the online gaming platform, known as the contest entry amount, also is taxed at 18%. The GST Council received multiple representations from the industry bodies in respect of the issues pertaining to A. The rate of tax, and B. The value on which the tax is to be levied, that is, the contest entry amount or the gross gaming revenue. In June 19, the Indian GST Council recommended that the issues faced by the online gaming sector be referred to a fitment and law committee review and then be presented to the GST Council for larger deliberations. The fitment and law committee deferred its report. In May 21, the GST Council constituted the first group of ministers, also known as GOM, to primarily examine, discuss, and suggest any changes to be introduced in the legal regime of valuation of services provided by online gaming. The GOM discussed the issues and agreed to defer them because of the complexity of the issues involved. The second GOM was reconstituted in February 2022 to look into the following two aspects. First, the rate of tax, whether 18% or 28% should be levied on three different sectors, namely the online gaming sector, casinos, and horse racing. Second, whether GST should be levied on the commission charged by the organizer, known as CEA, or the entry amount of stake, which is known as the GGR. In June 2022, the GOM submitted its report to the GST Council. The GOM made the following recommendation. The GOM acknowledged that all the three activities, namely the online gaming, casinos, and horse racing, are different, though they all had a sense of betting and gambling involved. It was recommended that a uniform rate of 28% of tax be levied on all the three activities. It was recommended that for the purpose of the levy of GST, no distinction should be made between the activities merely on the ground that an activity was a game of skill or a game of chance, or both. This recommendation was a departure from the existing provisions of the law. Further, in respect of online gaming, it was recommended that GST at 28% be levied on the full value of the consideration, including the contest entry fee paid by the players without making a distinction, such as game of skill and game of chance. Post receipt of the GOM report, the extensive deliberations were made by the members of the GST Council. Member states highlighted the possibility of tax evasions and some of the practical difficulties that may be faced by implementing the proposed recommendations. In this meeting, the GST Council decided to re examine the issue and take a decision based on consensus. With this background, the Indian government brought in a new perspective to online gaming from a tax and regulatory perspective. Thus, the first proposal was made in February 23, where in the union budget, government introduced a new tax and TDS regime under the Income Tax Act 1961 for winnings from online gaming. This will be covered in detail later. Further, in April 2023, from a regulatory perspective, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology amended the IT rules to create additional obligation for online gaming intermediaries who enable access to real money game. Neha would be covering this part. In July and August 2023, the GST Council, in its 50th meeting, recommended that all the three activities, namely the online gaming, casinos, and horse racing, be taxed at a uniform rate of 28% on full value of bets placed in case of online gaming, and recommended certain specific amendments to be made in the legislation. GST Council also decided that efforts will be made to complete the process of making amendments in the Act at the earliest and bring the amendments into effect from 1st October 2023, which is by next week. Before we discuss the proposed amendments in detail, I now hand over to Madhava for taking a poll question.
Thanks, Shilpi. I think Madhava is facing some challenge. In the interim, we'll take over the poll question. In your country, does online gaming is classified into game of skill and game of chance in order to determine the taxability? You could select yes as A or no as B. So we'll pause for another 15 seconds for everybody to respond, and we would like your wholehearted support for this. Great. So we have more than 75 people who have responded, and around 59% have responded as no and 41% as yes. So that's a versatile kind of an answer and a 50-50 mix. We now move to briefly discuss the recent amendments proposed in respect of online gaming and its implications from a goods and service tax perspective. Over to you, Shil.
Thanks, Irene. Let's now look into the recent amendment proposed by the Indian government. First, let's understand as to which activity has been made taxable. As per the recommendation of the GOM, the bifurcation of online gaming into game of skill and game of chance has been removed. New definition of online gaming and online money gaming has been introduced. Online money gaming is defined as an online game in which players pay or deposit money or money's worth, including virtual digital assets, in the expectation of winning money or money's worth in any event, whether or not its outcome is based on skill or chance. Further, online gaming has been defined as an offering of a game on the internet or an electronic network and includes online money gaming as well. As can be seen, the definition is very wide to cover a large ambit of activities relating to online gaming. Further, the the historical classification of online gaming into the game of skill or chance has been removed. Further, under GST provisions, transactions which are neither treated as supply of goods or services are mentioned in Schedule 3 of the Act. Actionable claims other than lottery, betting, and gambling and horse racing are included in this schedule. Now, till now, the courts have been taking a position that online game of skill qualifies as an actionable claim and hence are not treated as a supply of goods or service as well. Thus, in order to bring such transactions into the ambit of GST levy, online money gaming has been defined as a specified actionable claim and specifically excluded from Schedule 3 of the CGST Act. Thus, specified actionable claim of online gaming have been brought into the ambit of GST liability. The definition of virtual digital assets definition has been borrowed from the Income Tax Act. Let us now understand on what value the tax is proposed to be levied. In case of gaming, the value of supply shall be the total amount paid, payable, or deposited with the supplier using money, money's worth, or virtual digital assets on behalf of the player. No deduction in the value of supply is to be available for any amount refunded by the supplier to the player, irrespective of the reason, even if the refunded amount was essentially not utilized by the player for event participation. Further, winnings directly redeposited in further events without withdrawals are not subjected to GST. Thus, a view is emerging that once a deposit is made by the player to the online gaming intermediary, GST at 28% is applicable irrespective of the utilization of the deposit on the online gaming platform. It is pertinent to note that the notification in respect of rate of tax is still awaited. As mentioned earlier, GST Council has recommended that online gaming be taxed at the rate of 28%. In order to bring parity between the foreign and the domestic online gaming intermediaries, following amendments are sought to be made. Prior to the present amendment, online gaming services provided by foreign online gaming intermediaries was considered as online information and data access or retrieval services, known as OIDAR, or commonly known as electronically supplied services in many other jurisdictions. OIDA services are taxed at the rate of 18%. Thus, now online money gaming has been excluded from this definition of OIDA services and is proposed to be taxed separately at the rate of 28%. Thus, this distinction also ensures that online money gaming activities where participants deposited fund with the anticipation of winning are treated separately from digital service offerings also which are covered under OIDA. Further, correspondingly, corresponding changes have been made in the Act also to introduce a new registration mandate whereby a foreign gaming operator or its agent in India will be required to obtain a single registration under a simplified registration scheme and undertake GST obligation in India. Please note that that simplified registration scheme is yet to be notified. Further, a provision has been introduced for blocking of access by the public to any information generated, transmitted, received, or hosted in any computer software used for supply of online money gaming by such supplier in case of failure to comply with the provisions of registration as well as payment of tax as in such manner as may be specified under the Information Technology Act. As mentioned earlier, GST Council has decided that efforts will be made to complete the process of making the amendment in the Act at the earliest and bring these amendments into effect from 1st October 23. Because of the federal structure of the country, India has adopted a dual GST model where both center and the state administer and levy the GST. Presently, the changes in the Finance Act have been passed by both houses of parliament. The process of making corresponding amendments in the state legislation is underway. Thus, the next couple of days are critical to monitor the date of implementation. Further, it is expected that FAQs may be issued by the government to clarify some of the transitionary aspects. Let's move to the next slide. In a snapshot, the tax position on online gaming and online money game is as follows. Online gaming, excluding online money gaming, is classified as OIDA services and is taxed at 18% of gross consideration to be charged. However, online money gaming is now classified as goods, which is a specified actionable claim and is taxed at 28% on total amount paid, payable, or deposited using money, money worths, or virtual digital assets on behalf of the player. Let's move to the next slide. We understand that online gaming industry is in the process of gearing up for the upcoming changes. Companies are evaluating the business scenarios and identifying the internal IT, legal process, and documentation and accounting which are likely to be impacted because of these changes. Some of the points being deliberated upon are impact on promotions, bonus points, cashbacks provided by the online gaming intermediaries to the player, impact on other sources of revenue for online gaming intermediaries within the same gaming platform, such as platform fee, in app purchases of services and goods, and transitionary issues such as taxability of opening balance of deposit as on the date of effective date of implementation. Thus, the amendment introduced have brought in certainty on the taxability of online gaming companies in India, which has been in discussions for a very long time in respect of rate and value of taxation. However, the industry awaits clarification on many practical aspects on implementation of these changes. I now hand over the discussion to Madhav to discuss this forward.
Thanks, Shilpi. We would like to mention that based on the recent media reports, it appears that tax authorities are in the process of issuing show cause notices to various online gaming companies demanding GST at the rate of 28% on the gross gaming revenue, especially for the period from July 2017 till the implementation of this new provision. The matter is currently sub judice and is pending before Supreme Court in the case of a leading online money gaming company. I would now request DP Nagendra Kumar sir to throw light on the investigations that are being carried out and in light of these amendments that are being proposed with effect from October 2 2023. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madhav. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nagendra Kumar. I'm Senior Advisor, Indirect Taxes, Deloitte, India. Ms. Shilpi has taken us through the details, including the legislative journey governing the taxing of online games in the Indian context. Now, the amendments which have been proposed and has been carried forward consequent to the 50th and 51st GST Council meeting, laying down the law holding that it shall be charged to 28% tax and also to be taxed on the full value, is proposed to be implemented from 1st of October 2023, as she has mentioned. Now, the issue is the GST was introduced in India from 1st July 2017. And what could be the position to be taken with regard to taxing of online games in India for the period from 1st July 2017 to 30th September 2023 is a question which is currently being looked into by the tax authorities. The tax authorities have consistently taken a view that the online gaming in India is to be equated with betting gambling because there is a stake of money or money's worth is put into while playing on these games. Accordingly, It should be treated as a betting gambling and covered under the carve-out listed in Schedule 3, which is actually specifying the goods or services which are neither supply of goods or services. The carve-out makes an exception, and by bracketing the online gaming as a betting and gambling, the authorities have proposed to tax it at the rate of 28% on the full value. The first such investigation resulted in issue of a formal notice to one of the big online game operators in India at Bangalore for an amount of 21,000 crore plus. And this was litigated before the Karnataka High Court, and the High Court had quashed the notice proceedings, pursuant to which the central government has filed a special leave petition before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court currently has stayed the proceedings before the order passed by the High Court, and the matter is listed for hearing in the coming month. While this is currently in the state of the litigation, which is before the Supreme Court, the tax authorities across the country, both belonging to the central government and as well as the state, because it's a concurrent dual GST. So depending on the jurisdiction to which a particular taxpayer is marked, I think the investigations are being carried out by both authorities. And notices have been issued for a few more companies who are basically engaged in online gaming, holding a tax position that the rate of tax applicable in such games will be 28% and on the full bet value, on the full compliance entry fee as such. So the issue currently now under investigation is likely to create additional liabilities to the companies, and is going to put into a situation where earlier they were all paying the tax has on the gross gaming revenue at the rate of 18%. The differential amount of tax on account of the rate difference and also on the difference in the valuation adopted is running into a huge liability across the gaming industry. This view basically holding that the online gaming are to be taxed at 28% and also on the full value. While this has been made clear with an amendments proposed only in 2023, applying retrospectively, the government has taken a position that these amendments are clarificatory in nature and they are not retrospective. They are clarificatory, that means the position remained the same, that online game were to be attracting 28% and on the full value. This is also one of the challenges before the courts to say that these amendments are of a substantial nature and they could be at best applicable prospectively and cannot be retrospectively applied. And the court is also seized with this issue, which would find some solution when the final orders are issued. This is what I just want to say, Madhav. Over to you back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It would be definitely be interesting to watch out for the developments in these, court cases. So moving on, this brings us to our second polling question. And the question is, in your country, GST or indirect taxes on online gaming is levied on what value? Option A, is it on contest entry amount? Option B, is it on gross gaming revenue? Or option C, any other amount? Requesting all the attendees to take up the poll, please. Okay, the results so far seem to suggest that about 22 participants have mentioned that the levy of indirect tax is on the gross gaming revenue, and only 6 of them have responded that in their respective countries the levy is on the contest entry amount, and others is about 3, and don't know or not applicable is about 23. Great. So with this, we will now move to briefly discuss the regulatory amendments in respect of online gaming and its implications. I now hand over to Neha to discuss the regulatory updates.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Madhav, and hi, everyone, and thanks for joining this session. The first thing that we need to note is that, online gaming space is an emerging sector. Therefore, the legislations that impact this space are not equipped to deal with the contemporary issues that often emerge. And we have heard Mr. Nakendra Kumar and Shilpi talking about this. When online gaming sector is being talked about, it has been often seen that a lot of rejections has been there due to mislabeling and mischaracterization of them as gambling, leading to imposition of restrictions being placed upon them. In today's session, I will be discussing on three major aspects. One, on different jurisprudences and regulations that have been applicable on gaming sector. I will also be talking about the recent amendments that have happened on the IT Act and the data privacy regulations that have recently come up, how this impact the sector, and the overall other regulations, how they have been impacting this sector per se. So moving on, yeah. So gambling in India is banned under the Public Gambling Act of 1867, which provides for the punishment of the public gambling and operating common gaming houses. Similarly, the Prize Competition Act of 1955 prohibits the promotion and conduct of prize competitions where the prize offered exceeds rupees 1,000 a month. It further lays down licensing conditions for prize competitions which fall within the limit. The Lottery Regulations Act of 1998 regulates physical state lotteries and provides for penalty for contravention under the Act. Even 294A of the Indian Penal Code criminalizes the operation of lottery not being the state lottery or lottery authorized by the state government. And it is rather important to note that betting and gambling fall under the state list as well under Schedule 7 of our Constitution. What this means is that each state has different legislations, even it could be contrary to the central regulations. States like West Bengal and Goa have banned gambling and betting through their state legislations. On the other hand, states like Sikkim and Nagaland have approached this topic with open mind and provided appropriate regulations to conduct online gaming while prohibiting acts of gambling and betting. Recent regulations have acknowledged the modern requirement of online gaming companies and attempted to provide the appropriate framework for them. It would be justified for me to also talk about some of the jurisprudences which have also been approached whether for the online gaming sector to make it more pragmatic. In case of Chandigarh High Court, the Punjab and Haryana High Court held that any sports game that can be characterized as game of skill does not fall under the gambit of gambling activities. Similar position was also taken by Bombay High Court, wherein playing of fantasy games online was regarded as game of skill and not a game of chance. This was also seconded in Rajasthan High Court, wherein the issue of treating the game of one prominent game as having an element of betting or gambling is no more res integra, since the SLP against these High Court's orders and where the reliance was made again on the Bombay High Court, the High Court had already been dismissed. It is pertinent to note that certain legislations were implemented with specific intent to criminalize online gaming. These legislations have been successfully contended against as well. In one of the High Court judgment of Madras High Court, while deciding the viability of Tamil Nadu Gaming and Police Law Amendment Act of 2021, it declared that the Amendment Act was ultra-vires to the Constitution in entirety and struck down this as a consequence. The Act had sought to amend the definition of gaming to include wagering and betting in cyberspace and prohibited game of skill if played for wager, bet, money, or other stake. The court clarified that the game of skill, which can be played online for stakes, cannot be categorized as betting or gambling. The court further clarified that there is no distinction between card games and board games, such as chess or Scrabble, for instance, being played physically offline or via cyberspace, which is an online medium. Similar position was also taken in the Karnataka High Court, which again struck down the Karnataka Police Amendment Act of declaring, which was again regarded as ultra-vires to the constitution of the country. Now, I now hand it over back to Madhava for taking up the poll question.
Thanks, Neha. Our third polling question for the day. Does your country have some standard principles which can be relied to determine game of skill versus game of chance to bring more consistency? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Option C, it is actually a reliance based on various jurisprudences. Option D, don't know or not applicable. Requesting the attendees to take up the poll, please. So Neha, I thought I will just ask you a quick question based on whatever you have covered so far. Given the government focus on India integrated as part of a global supply chain, what opportunities are you seeing in this?
No, I think it's a very valid question that there has been a lot of focus on the government in terms of integrating different goods and services to be part of the global value chain. And if we look back, the Union Budget of 2022, the ABGC task force was a welcome move under the flagship of Ministry of Information Broadcasting, wherein they came out with a good recommendation of providing the infrastructure support as well as incentives. Similarly, we've also seen that there are ABGC policies that have come out by the different states. Karnataka has been having this for last 5-7 years, wherein there is a dedicated ABGC policy. There is it's a biggest COE that they have created for startups, wherein they have sponsored international events. Financial support has been provided up to $3,200. There are production grants which are being provided. Patent registration incentives are provided. Marketing incentives are provided. Telangana similarly came out with a COE and an image policy, again, which provides a training academy to startups in this space. Maharashtra has created again two ABGC parks in Lonavala and Pune, and the Center for Development for Advanced Computing. It's also providing certain capital subsidies and IP support. UP has again announced of a dedicated ABGC policy in this space. So, while this is a the economy is being contributed towards the gaming sector at the local level, but with an ongoing technology advancement, the focus is now moving towards export of this and seeing this as a big potential sector and making India and making this as a global hub. Yeah.
Thanks, Neha. So we have the results, and most of the participants have mentioned that they are not aware or not applicable. And the second majority, which is about 81% of them, have stated that the principle is more based on jurisprudence and not really based on the reality that is involved. Thanks for this. Back to you, Neha, to cover the remaining part of the regulatory updates.
Yeah, sure. So what we've also seen is that there have been regulations, as Shilpi was talking about. The obligations which have been placed on the intermediaries, which are dealing with money gains, and therefore there is an enhanced liabilities which have been placed. So similarly, there have been corresponding amendments in the regulations as well. So it is imperative for me to talk about the IT intermediary guidelines, which got amended. Which were introduced in 2021, and online gaming was included within that in April 2023. These rules have proposed a novel self-regulatory regime for online gaming intermediaries. MeitY notified these amendment rules after a series of consultations with diverse stakeholders, ranging from gaming operators, intermediaries, investors, parents, non-government organizations, etc. Considering the uncertainties and interference placed by numerous state legislations and court proceedings, we hope that these amendments are, a much-needed respite in terms of, if they are regulated, then at least some reliance would be placed on this. The amendment rules have distinguished between online games and online real money games, with heavier regulatory obligations being placed on online gaming intermediaries, which are providing online real money games. It is important to note that obligations related to online games will come into force after 3 months once the 3 self-regulatory bodies will be notified by MeitY, which are yet to be notified. Online real money games are very similar to what have been defined under the GST regulations, and they are deemed to be permissible to be offered in India. The verification of the permissibility of these games will be done by the self-regulatory bodies. These self-regulatory bodies are meant to weed out the games considered betting and gambling, and therefore there is a registration mechanism for the platform operator as well as for the games. So online games that are not deemed permissible run the risk of being blocked in India under 69A of the IT Act. The intermediaries offering real money games will have to disclose the information about their policies, practices. For example, protecting the user deposits to their users, and therefore, there is a dedicated verification mechanism of the users, which is mandated for the operator. Further, they must comply with the additional obligations such as law enforcement request and conducting the KYC before accepting the deposits. Very important piece that again is related to tax is that intermediaries which are offering real money games are required to appoint 3 key officers: chief compliance officer, who's basically providing information to third parties; a nodal contact person, who's basically providing information to the law enforcement agency; and the resident grievance officer, who's addressing the grievances. So all 3 of them are required to be the officers or the employees of the platform which is providing the services, and they need to be resident in India. And my colleague will talk about the tax implications of this in the subsequent session. Further, these intermediaries are not permitted to offer financing options to the users, either on itself or through a third party, for playing games on their platforms. The intermediaries also need to have a physical contact address in India, and all this information is required to be placed on the platform. It's also important to know that there is also a need for having a framework to verify the games. And what they have provided is that any game which is against the sovereignty and integrity of the country will not be seen as the eligible game. Anything that creates a user harm, maybe psychological harm, will be not be considered. Similarly, the age rating mechanism need to be mentioned, need to be created. And if there is any risk of being addiction or creation of a financial fraud, will also not be considered to be the right game. So they've given outlined some of the frameworks there as well. I think my discussion may not be complete with the recent amendment which has come in on the Data Personal and the Data Protection Act of 2023, which was recently approved by the Parliament in August of 2023, which will significantly impact the data collection, processing, and storing obligations of online gaming companies. By the operations of DPDP, the gaming companies will have to comply with all the duties and obligations of data fiduciary under the Act. One of the most important things that gaming companies need to ensure is the processing of child data, which is individual, which is below 18 years of age. And this is very different from what we've seen in the international data privacy regulations, which provides the verifiable consent from the parents and the guardians. Considering there is a wide appeal of online games, it is pertinent for online gaming companies to ensure that they employ the appropriate age verification mechanism, which is also provided under the framework. Online gaming companies also need to ensure that the IT outsourcing hubs employed by them are compliant from cross-border sharing requirements and sectoral requirements if applicable. In case the online gaming company is designated as a significant data fiduciary under DPDP, which has a larger exposure, there are additional obligations which have been placed on them. They would be required to appoint the data protection officer, required to conduct a periodic data audit and data protection impact assessment. Also, online companies would need to draft notice for processing, privacy policy, and other necessary SOPs before processing the personal data for their users. Upon a request made by any user, they are mandated to delete, correct, update, or grant access of personal data as and when required. DPDP has placed an immense obligations upon the online gaming companies to ensure that they collect, store, and process data and build up the reasonable safeguards and employ organizational measures which are in conformity with DPDP. If you move to the next slide, there are further regulatory aspects which are again important. These have been there in place and we've seen some of the trends on them. So if we move from the left side, Section 69A of the Information Technology Act allows the government to issue content blocking orders on online gaming intermediaries, such as internet service providers, telecom operators, web hosting services, search engines, online marketplaces, if the content or the information provided on such online intermediaries deemed to be a threat to the national security, sovereignty, or public order. MeitY has banned multiple applications in past on this issue. And it is also essential to understand that DPDP Act also has a similar content blocking powers. This ties into the fact that online gaming companies engage in high volume of data processing and transfer. From the perspective, as I said about DPDP, there are significant obligations. Since there will be a lot of money change that will happen, so therefore the implications from RBI circulars and directions which mandate use of e-wallets and registration requirement for authorization is definitely very, very critical. And therefore, if a company is looking for the similar requirements, it is also essential to look at the outsourcing guidelines that have come in place recently on the obligations for the regulated entities to comply with the outsourcing requirements. Again, advertisement is a very important element. So advertisement for online gaming is heavily regulated, and organizations such as ASCII, METI, and Ministry of Information Broadcasting regularly dictate the terms and declarations which are required to be made while publishing the advertisements for game and related sports. As Regent said last week, MIB had warned media, social media companies, and related parties against enabling and carrying advertisements on behalf of online gaming intermediaries which are offering online real money games. This was done in lieu of the Asia Cup tournament, which was held right after. So, accordingly, online gaming companies need to be extremely cognizant of any advertisement guidelines and advisories that may apply to them. Another important aspect is on the intellectual property, because we've seen that gaming companies need to keep in mind their IP handling and personality rights of the real life players and celebrities. Recently, we've seen in case of, one very recent case which happened to the Delhi High Court was on recognizing the free speech trumps a celebrity's right to publicity. The court noted that mere use of publicly available information regarding the player's performance and personality to build commercial product does not infringe upon the celebrity's personalities or publicity rights. It should be noted that an appeal before this is pending, and another development that happened again in the Delhi High Court was wherein one of the Bollywood personalities, there was a case wherein one of the gaming company was using the technology tools such as AI, machine learning, and deepfakes for doing the face morphing, and GIS were created, and his voiceover was also being used. And considering the nascent stage at which the jurisprudences are there, the Delhi High Court had ordered in favor of the Bollywood personality. So therefore, there is a significant action which is happening again on the IP space, which requires a further scrutiny as in how the law is being developed in this space on protecting the rights of the platforms as well as the celebrities to that extent. There are multiple opportunities on the horizon that we see on the online gaming companies, which can be capitalized upon. Both national and international policies, which I just spoke to Madhav on the AVGC sector, we are seeing that to be a big traction, and government is coming out with the similar schemes into promoting this sector. I'll now hand it over back to Madhava. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. Our fourth polling question for the day is on your screens. Do you believe that self-regulatory bodies' role would be more eminent to industry, or will it be seen as a quasi-regulator? Option A, yes, it is industry eminent. Option B, it's quasi-regulator. Option C, not sure. Option 4, don't know or not applicable. Requesting the attendees to take up the poll. Okay, majority of the participants who have taken up the poll feels that the role of SRPs is more in the nature of quasi-regulator, and other majority feels like they are not really sure, and only about 18% which is minority feels that it is industry eminent. I would now hand over the discussion to Hiren, who will take us through the direct tax related provisions with respect to online gaming and its implications.
Thank you, Madhav and Neha, and greetings to all those who have joined us on the call today. We shall now cover the following areas: rationale for introduction of tax and withholding tax provisions for online gaming, overview of key provisions, and lastly, key challenges and takeaways for all participants. Historically, winnings from activities such as crosswords, lottery, card games, and other games of any sort, which is often referred to as casual and non-recurring income, was taxable at a flat rate of 30% under special provisions. Tax was required to be deducted at source by the payer, where the winnings exceeded rupees 10,000. It may be pertinent to note that the de minimis threshold was not linked with any financial year and also did not specify aggregation of winnings during the year to arrive at the threshold of rupees 10,000. Accordingly, there existed a school of thought that the withholding provisions apply only if the winnings exceed rupees 10,000 per transaction. The legislature, however, through Finance Act 2023, has brought about two key significant changes. First, it has amended existing provisions to specify that the winnings during relevant financial year would now be aggregated to determine the threshold of rupees 10,000. Second, considering the rise in the users of online games, the Finance Act 2023 has brought in separate provisions for withholding and taxation of online games. The same are effective from 1 April 2023, that is financial year 2023-24. It may be pertinent to note that under the existing as well as new provisions, the winnings are taxable at a flat rate of 30%. However, unlike the existing provisions, no minimum threshold of rupees 10,000 has been provided for withholding from online winnings, except a minimal leeway of rupees 100 provided through CBDT circular, which can be availed only in certain situations. Speaking of relevance of the new tax and withholding provisions for online gaming companies and related service providers, the same are relevant to determine first, tax and withholding implications, second, determination of the taxpayer who would be required to withhold tax, third, the time when such tax needs to be withheld and the amount on which tax needs to be deducted. Lastly, payment of relevant taxes and compliance with Indian income tax and other provisions where the online gaming company or any other entity involved in the online gaming transaction is taxable in India. Moving to the next slide. Having discussed the rationale and relevance of the new tax provisions relating to online gaming, we shall now discuss key withholding provisions thereof. The newly introduced withholding provisions require that any person responsible for paying to any person any income by way of winnings from any online game during the financial year shall deduct income tax on the net winnings in his user account. Accordingly, there are following three key elements which need to be considered to determine if a person is required to withhold tax under the new provisions. First, the winning has to be from an online game. Second, the withholding obligation is cast on the person responsible for paying the winnings. Thirdly, it applies to net winnings in user account which need to be computed in the prescribed manner. Only once the said conditions are satisfied, the person responsible for paying needs to withhold tax from the winnings. It may be pertinent to note that the withholding provisions also apply to winnings in kind, whether these winnings in kind are in part or are in full. Once it has been identified that tax is required to be deducted, it is also important to determine when such tax is required to be deducted, that is, at the time of payment of winnings, like in the case of existing provisions, crediting the winnings to the user account, or when the winning amount is withdrawn from the user account, or any other time. In this regard, you may want to note that it has been provided that the withholding obligation is attracted at three stages depending on the activity in the user account. First, at the time of withdrawal from the user account, and this would be with respect to the first withdrawal. Second, at the time of subsequent withdrawals from the user account. And lastly, at the end of the financial year on the remaining amount of net winning in the user account. One may note that the emphasis is on the relevant financial year, that is, whether it is activity in the user account during the financial year or balance in the user account at the end of the relevant financial year. I would now hand over to Madhava for taking us through the fifth question.
Thanks, Hiren. This brings us to the fifth polling question. And the question is, in your country, is there a separate tax regime for withholding tax and taxation of winnings from online games?
Option A, yes. Option B, no separate regime. Option C, separate regime only for taxation. And option D, separate regime only for withholding. Requesting the attendees to take up the poll. Eileen, I have a question for you while the attendees take up the poll. Is the
Sure.
30% tax rate applicable to all, irrespective of the residential status?
Yes, Madhva. Currently, this 30% tax rate is applicable to both residents as well as non-residents, and the same needs to be increased by applicable surcharge and cess. Great. So we have majority of the participants based on the polling result who say that there is no separate regime, and which is followed by yes, there is a separate regime. So yes, again there is a around mixed bag, but majority is tilting towards no separate regime for withholding and tax provisions, and it is a consolidated provision, unlike in India. Thank you, participants. And moving forward, if we can go to the next slide. Just a quick recap till now of what we have discussed. We discussed the rationale for introduction of separate tax and withholding tax provisions in relation to online gaming. We went through a brief overview of the withholding tax provisions, that is, who is required to withhold tax under the new provisions. And lastly, when is such tax required to be deducted? That is, it is required to be firstly deducted at the time of first withdrawal, then at the time of subsequent withdrawals by the user from his user account, and at the end of the financial year based on the balance in the user account. Now we shall discuss certain points which may be relevant for determining the amount of net winnings on which tax needs to be withheld. You may want to note that formulas have been prescribed to compute the net winnings on which tax has to be withheld at each of the three stages we discussed. Broadly, the formula requires adjustment of taxable deposits or withdrawals or year-end balances, and this adjustment has to be with respect to non-taxable deposits, earlier withdrawals which would have been taxed therefrom, and opening balance, and thereby you will arrive at a net winnings. The formulas have been prescribed under Rule 133 of the Income Tax Rules 1962. One key point which needs to be considered by the person responsible for paying the withholding tax is that the losses incurred by players during a particular financial year generally would get adjusted while computing net winnings. However, the same would get lapsed at the end of the financial year. So there is no concept of carry forward. Moving further, we shall discuss certain clarifications which have been provided by the Central Board of Direct Taxes and which may be important for computing the net winnings. Firstly, the goods and services tax, which was discussed by Shilpi, is not to be included for the purposes of valuation of winnings. Secondly, in normally in online gamings there may be bonuses, referral bonuses, incentives, winnings, etc. given by online gaming intermediary to the user. These would generally be considered as taxable deposit. However, an exception has been provided whereby incentive stroke bonuses credited in user account only for the purposes of playing and which cannot be withdrawn or used for any other purposes are to be excluded. These are to be ignored for computing net winnings, and it may be noted that a separate account has to be maintained by the online gaming company or intermediary for such winnings. However, if these incentives or bonuses are recharacterized and allowed to be withdrawn, they would be treated as taxable deposit on recharacterization and considered as net winnings in such a. It has been clarified that withdrawal also includes payment to the user in kind or cash, as we discussed earlier, and it includes partly in cash and kind. This is applicable even if it is not routed through the user account. So, if anything over and above user account has been provided, the winnings in kind or cash, that will also be considered. Further, when in consideration of amount in user account, some coupons, etc., are issued for purchase of goods, services, or some item in kind is issued, that will also be considered as withdrawal and tax is to be withheld before providing such items in kind. The key point to note here is that in case of in-kind winnings, the payer is required to ensure that the tax has been paid before release of the winnings in kind. Winnings given in kind need to be valued based on fair market value, except where online gaming has purchased the winnings before providing it to the user. In such cases where the winnings have been purchased, the purchase price will be the value for winnings. Now, in case if the online intermediary manufactures such items given as winnings, in that case, the price that is charged to customers for such items shall be the value for such winnings. Where the net winnings are in kind, the person responsible for paying needs to ensure that tax has been paid before releasing the winnings. The deductor can release the net winnings in kind after deductee provides proof of payment of such tax. Alternatively, the deductor may deduct tax and pay to the government. So these are the two options broadly to ensure that with respect to in-kind winnings, the taxes are released before the winnings are released, or taxes are paid before the winnings are released. Moving to the next slide, having discussed certain clarifications which have been issued by the CBDT, we shall now discuss certain challenges relating to the newly introduced withholding provisions. First, we will discuss with respect to classification as an online game. As discussed earlier, to classify as an online game, there have to be three criteria which need to be met. There has to be a game, the game has to be offered on the internet, and lastly, the game has to be accessible by a user through a computer resource. While the term game is not defined in the Act, the term which has been defined as card game and other game of any sort. The said term includes any game show, an entertainment program on television or electronic mode in which people compete to win prizes or any other similar game. However, the point to be noted here is that this definition is only for a specific purpose, and hence one may contend that the requirement of people competing should not apply to online games. In such a case, one may have to consider the general meaning of the term game, and which may be wide enough to cover any online game. Unlike and also this excludes criteria which have been discussed earlier by Shilpi and Neha, wherein real money was required to be placed before entering a particular game. So under the income tax, the gamut is quite wide enough. In such cases, companies which are not gaming companies but may run certain online contests, even in such cases, such online contests may get classified as an online game. Secondly, with respect to game being offered on the internet, a question arises as to whether such games played on local area network or any other similar network which is not offered on the internet would be covered, whether that would be covered within the definition of an online game or not. An example could be Counter Strike, which is played by 5 players or 6 players in a small room. Hence, one may need to evaluate whether a game could classify as an online game in order to attract the withholding tax provisions. Once we cross this hurdle, the second challenge is with respect to the person responsible to withhold tax. This obligation to withhold tax is on the person responsible for paying any income by way of winnings, while the guidelines issued by the Central Board of Direct Taxes seem to suggest that it is the online gaming intermediary who is responsible to withhold tax. However, the section does not specify the same and casts the obligation on the person responsible for paying. So effectively, whether an online gaming intermediary or any other entity in entire online gaming transaction is the person responsible for paying the winnings, this would require analysis basis the structure adopted, and the person responsible for paying would be required to withhold tax. Moving to the next point, it is with respect to computation of net winnings. We saw that there is a formula which has been given, but one would need to evaluate how to compute the net winnings, say when the entire amount is credited only to one user account. in case of team games, or where there's a team which is registered on the platform and the amount is credited to the team account, which is then split amongst the players. So then in such cases, one would need to determine how to apply the withholding tax formula. In case of winnings in kind, the manner of complying with the withholding provisions would need to be determined upfront. That is, the systems would need to be geared up to take the determination of net winnings at relevant stages, including with respect to in-kind weighting, factoring various users and the type of users and their accounts. So one would have to check if the systems are equipped enough. Compliances. Moving forward, as per the withholding provisions, any person who is responsible for paying income by way of winnings from online game is required to withhold tax. The section does not specify residence of the deductor, that is the person responsible for paying, or that of the deductee. While there are few findings given by Supreme Court in case of the Vodafone case, however, the withholding tax provisions have undergone amendment after the same with respect to the deductor. Therefore, a non-resident may need to examine if it is required to comply with the withholding tax provisions in India, looking at the or considering the manner in which the game is formulated and the income tax provisions. It may be pertinent to note that non-compliance could trigger disallowance, tax, interest, and penal consequences for the deductor. I would now like to hand over to Madhava for taking the sixth polling question. So here, quickly, if do you believe that the TDS system is equipped with the new computation mechanism prescribed to compute the winnings? And the options are yes, no, and somewhat. Great. Considering the want of time, I would announce the poll results, and glad to know that some majority of the participants have answered that somewhat their systems are geared up. However, around say 32% have also said that their systems are not geared up, and glad to know 25% say that yes, it is geared up. Moving forward to the next slide, with the issues with respect to non-resident gaming companies. Considering that now we have looked at withholding tax issues, we'll look at certain taxation aspects with respect to non-resident entities which may be engaged in online gaming. As Neha discussed earlier, an online gaming or the IT rules, information technology rules, require physical contact address, appointment of certain officers like chief compliance officer, nodal contact who are resident of India, and a physical contact address is also required in India. One would need to examine whether such presence and the activities of the officers or the personnel in India could create permanent establishment exposure in India. Also importantly, one would need to examine if this entire gaming activity would be considered to have a significant economic presence in India, or it would create a significant economic presence in India. Considering if a tax treaty benefit is available, then the non-resident entity would need to examine the permanent establishment exposure in India. Lastly, if there is any equalization levy impact in the absence of a permanent establishment in India. Generally, this is applicable to an e-commerce operator who is defined to mean a non-resident who owns, operates, or manages digital or electronic facility or platform for online sale of goods or online provision of services, or both. If the e-commerce operator provides e-commerce services supply, in such cases, equalization levy may be applicable. So online gaming intermediary or platform may be considered as an e-commerce operator, which may be liable to equalization levy. one would need to examine the entire transaction and arrive at this conclusion. Moving to the last slide, which is a summary of what we've discussed. What would be important from a direct tax standpoint would be determination of whether there is an online game. If it qualifies as an online game, evaluate the tax and withholding implications and the compliances to be undertaken. We have to discuss or look at the withholding areas which need to be considered, gear up the internal systems for withholding compliances, work out the net winnings for withholding, maintain appropriate documentation. Lastly, with respect to taxability of non-residents, we have to see who would be or what is the role of non-resident gaming intermediary, platform, company, or relevant service provider. Evaluate whether there could be a significant economic presence or permanent establishment or equalization levy exposure in India. Maintain documentation and undertake the required compliances. With this, we conclude our discussion on key direct tax implications for online gaming companies and related entities. And I would now like to hand over to Madhva to take forward the discussions. Madhav, in case you're speaking, you're on mute.
Sorry. That's all we have time for. Thanks, Shilpi, DP, Nagendra, Kumar, Hiren, and Neha, and special thanks to all of you who were able to join us. We would like to encourage you to fill out the short survey that will pop up on your screen momentarily and tell us what you think about today's program. If you joined us late, please note that this presentation will be archived for future viewing. If you feel that others would benefit from this webcast, please share the webcast via the share this icon. We will respond to all the questions submitted during the webcast in a couple of weeks. Also, if you think any of other questions or comments later, please feel free to reach out either to me or our speakers. We would be more than happy to talk to you. And please don't forget to tune in to our next scheduled webcast from the transfer pricing series on 17th October, titled Treasury Transfer Pricing, Department Pricing, and Cash Pooling. At last, from all of us, thank you for your participation in Deloitte's Asia Pacific Tax webcast today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.